Hello and welcome to this special roundtable edition here at selloutcrowd.com. We are brought to you by Ford. Don't forget to drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. And speaking of Oklahoma, we got Oklahoma's full schedule for 2024, the SEC schedule released tonight. I'm joined by Jenni Carlson, by Barry Tramel, Guerin Emig, and Eli Lederman to talk about just that. And let's start with you, Jenni Carlson. When you see Oklahoma's schedule laid out for the first time, what's the first thing that stands out to you?
I hope Oklahoma fans are loving the SEC as much now as they have for the last couple years. The idea of going to the SEC has been all the rage among the Crimson and Cream, but tonight they got their first look at what this could really be like, and obviously it's going to be tough. I mean, there is a tough slate of games, whether you're talking about some of those October games, OU Texas, obviously hosting South Carolina, going to Ole Miss, but then those two finishing weeks, guys, holy cow. Got Alabama and Norman, and then off to LSU for the last game of the season. Lots of tough games on this schedule.
Yeah, when I look at this schedule, I see a pretty good balance for the Sooners in terms of we knew who they were playing. We didn't know when they were playing everyone and everything. They got an off week before Alabama. They got an off week before Texas. But that finishing twosome of Alabama and LSU back to back, that's a tough finish. That's the end of the year when you're beat up, and then to have to go play Alabama and LSU. That's a very tough assignment for Brent Venables' team.
I think the balance it works in Oklahoma's favor. The off weeks are spread out. They do have a chance to rest a little bit, heal a little bit before they play Texas, and then before they have that finishing twosome of the Crimson Tide and Norman, and the game in Death Valley to finish the year. I hope it's a night game just for OU fans' sake at LSU that they get the full experience. Could be worse. Texas has to play, right? They have to play Georgia and Oklahoma back to back. Is that right? I think
that's right.
Indeed.
Yeah. And then how about this for late in the year? They don't have the finishing kick the Sooners do in terms of Alabama LSU. But you talk about objects of people's derision. They got to go to Arkansas and they got to go to A&M. Two of their last four games. What you talk about getting spit on in layers, in waterfalls at both of those games. So I think this broke pretty well for Oklahoma, as much as we can say a schedule breaks one way or another almost a year before the thing starts.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you guys on the balance. I think once we knew that there was probably going to be a period on this schedule where the Sooners were going to go close to a month maybe without playing a home game, that could have broke really poorly. And I think the games that are within there, kind of that it'll be after Tennessee. They've got Auburn. They've got an open date. They have Texas. And they've got, someone help me, who do they have on the
South Carolina?
South Carolina. Yeah. I mean, all that breaks. There we go. Todd's got it right there. That is high tech. That's what you get at Sellout Crowd. No, that could have been another sticking point, and it won't be. So I think that's big. And then I think what you are debating, what's better? Is it better or worse? Having those open dates before what are easily the two biggest games of the season, at least as we can project them right now, in Texas and Alabama, or is it whatever that end of season run with Alabama and LSU? Which one's going to hurt more? Which one's going to help more? I think is that central question.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned the first road game at Auburn. Let's start with you, Guerin. We know wherever the first true road game is going to be for Jackson Arnold, it's not going to be an easy opponent. I think we look at the end of the schedule and we forget that they get thrown right into the fire at the beginning against a good Tennessee team and a road game at Auburn. Does that stand out to you like it does me, Guerin?
The fact that they're opening so late in the year on the road is interesting. 4 home games before Arnold has to quarterback as a starter, as a true road quarterback against a team that, as was pointed out by the panel on ESPN tonight, actually plays above its head a little bit at home in general. Should have beaten Alabama if not for the problem against Gravedigger, the play that won that game somehow for the Sabans. That's liable to be tough. But again, everything's relative from this point forward. If you're going to be in the SEC, you're going to catch it at some point. It's just a matter of how hard you're going to catch it. And I already mentioned Texas and the things that they've got to look forward to, so to speak, down the stretch of their schedule. The Sooners don't play Alabama and Georgia. And as far as I can tell, Auburn and Tennessee both do. So how would that have been in terms of a welcome to the SEC moment to draw both of those heavyweights? You look at Florida's schedule from November on, and it's something out of it's a sadist schedule is what it is. So I imagine that that won't be a walk in the park, that first road game for Arnold and the Sooners at Auburn. But again, it's not Athens, it's not Tuscaloosa, it's not Death Valley. It's manageable, and for a team that needs to get off to a good start before things get really difficult, I think that's welcome news.
Hey guys, you know what I'll say about this road schedule for Oklahoma, which we knew before. We didn't know how it would play out, as Eli mentioned before, but it's kind of a sneaky tough road schedule because of Jackson Arnold, because of how some of these teams have turned out. I mean, Missouri, for example, much better this year than we expected the Tigers to be. If they continue on that roll, that's the opener. That's the first SEC game in the month of November for the Sooners after that game against Maine. So to finish with at Missouri, against Alabama and Norman, at LSU, that's no easy task. And obviously that Ole Miss game, another road game, that would have been a matchup essentially for the final playoff spot. If the rankings this year, if we'd been in a 12-team playoff with 11 and 12, that's where Ole Miss and OU finished the rankings. So, to me, the road schedule, when it first came out, you thought, well, this isn't going to be easy, but maybe it's manageable. It looks to me to be a little tougher, not so much with where the games land, but just the fact that some of these teams that OU is going to have to go on the road and face may be a whole lot better in 24 than we expected even a few months ago.
Barry, I'm going to start with you on this question. We see how tough this schedule is, and this is a year where you're going to have 2 off weeks coming up next season because of the way the calendar falls. In most years, you're only going to have 1 off week. Seeing how tough the schedule is right now, why would they add a 9th conference game, I guess? Are they really sadists, like Guerin Emig says?
Well, I think the one thing that you could look at is conference games earlier in the season, like the Sooners' 5th game of the year. They get all their non-cons, or they get 3 non-cons out of the way before they get into the SEC schedule. You see a few games sprinkled there in week 2 and week 3. That's one way to spread out the toughness level. But I do think there's a hidden clue here that suggests the SEC is preparing to stay at 8 conference games going forward, because they gave LSU the Sooners for Thanksgiving Saturday instead of Missouri. It was going to be one or the other, and they went with LSU. And if you're going to go with the 9-game conference schedule, most of the models had Missouri as a permanent opponent for the Sooners. And if that was going to be the deal, you might as well start the Oklahoma-Missouri Thanksgiving tradition now. But instead, it's LSU that gets the Thanksgiving slot for the Sooners. And that made me think maybe Greg Sankey and company are sort of rationalizing that they'll stay at 8 for a while. So I think the momentum has shifted towards the 8-game schedule. And that's what I'm expecting to happen, at least for the first few years of this 16-team SEC.
Well, that's a good point to make, because it's worth clarifying, and we're probably going to have to do this a whole bunch between now and next fall, but is that this is a 1-year scheduling agreement. This model, they're going to go with the 8-game. They've got to decide on a future model. Barry, you're more in on this stuff. You've got thoughts on this stuff I hadn't even thought of yet, but that's exactly right. I mean, that indicates that perhaps, this 8-team schedule is here to stay. And if it is, you're going to have more games, perhaps like Oklahoma's November 2 visit from Maine. We're going to get all engrossed in the SEC, all these great locales, all these big time games. And then first weekend of November, Maine and Norman, that is not going to have an SEC feel. And that's going to be a funky one. And perhaps I know Joe Castiglione has said that, he's not necessarily bought in on the whole SEC, pre-rivalry week scheduling an FCS opponent or something like that. But they've got 4 games on the schedule, non-conference. They're going to have to figure out where to schedule those. And you're probably going to get some more funky dates like they're going to have with Maine next fall.
It's going to be interesting to see too, guys, right? With the 12-team playoff, like how do all these really bad non-conference games, what does it mean in the end? Is it going to really be a determining factor for anything? If not, and if fans are still willing to buy tickets, the motivation to schedule up in those non-conference games is going to be none for teams like Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama, whoever in the SEC. Obviously, if that starts to bite a team when you're talking about quality of schedule, those sorts of things, I think that could come into play. But I love the idea of earlier in the season conference games, but as it relates to the SEC, I'm not sure they're going to have a ton of motivation to do that because, they do have teams playing some pretty big non-conference games. Even look at week 1, Miami at Florida, Georgia, Clemson, Notre Dame, Texas, LSU, USC. I mean, they've got some marquee games they can offer and say, here's our teams playing these marquee games. So while I love the idea of an SEC game or two earlier in the schedule, I think for TV's purposes, I'm not sure the SEC has a ton of motivation to do that sort of thing.
I remember 2 years ago when this news broke and we started to really visualize what this could mean for the schedule and what was ahead for Joe Castiglione in terms of offering fans something different, right? He's always worried about getting the place full, getting students there, getting the suites filled. And I think there was always an undercurrent of I could only sell Texas Tech, Kansas, and Iowa State and West Virginia so long. Eventually that's going to come back and get us in the age where it's easier to stay home, more convenient, more cost effective, all that stuff. And isn't it interesting that on the first night of the first SEC schedule review for the Sooners, OU's first home schedule includes games against Temple, Tulane, Maine, and Houston. So if we're stuck with an 8-game conference schedule, to Barry's point, this is sort of the the payoff for that is that if you're not careful and you get caught switching non-conference games because of affiliation or having to shuffle, as Joe C's had to do with the realignment, this is what can happen. And it's great that they're bringing in Josh Heupel. It's great that Alabama is coming to town, Shane Beamer in South Carolina. But those 4 non-conference games more or less stink. And that's something I don't think anyone anticipated 2 years ago when everyone started to really salivate over the possibilities here.
Hey, I can think of one attractive non-conference opponent the Sooners could schedule for one of those 4 games. Anyone guesses?
Tulsa, keep it in state. Golden Hurricane.
They could play Tulsa and do what they did this fall, or they could schedule Oklahoma State. I know that's got to go both ways.
Eli Chad Richardson Stadium is beautiful in September. I'm just letting you know.
Hey, I mean, the rate we're moving, and as Guerin talks about with the non-conference game, we might be out there.
The home schedule will be next year, for instance, will be a little better in terms of the depth because the Sooners drew the short straw with the Texas game in Dallas. OU and Texas, one of them was going to get 4 home games this year. One was going to get 3. The Sooners ended up with the 3. So next year they figure to get 4 home games. But Guerin's right. Alabama and Tennessee coming to town is so totally cool. But the backside of this schedule is not just no better than the Big 12, but in a lot of ways it's even worse. So there's some give and take with this SEC, at least from the outset.
Well, I do know that you got Michigan on the future schedule for Oklahoma. I know Nebraska coming up again for a home and home. My question is, will teams, and maybe we'll find this out next year, guys, in the 12-team playoff era, will teams benefit from scheduling like Florida is, playing Florida State and Miami and Central Florida out of conference? Or will teams benefit from doing what Oklahoma kind of had to do this year in getting that last game and playing 3 kind of, either lower tier Power 4 conference teams like Houston or mid-major teams like Tulane and Temple? So I think that will be kind of fascinating to watch. Eli, 30 seconds. What's it like in Columbia, Missouri in early November?
Oh, it is beautiful. It'll be a beautiful game day, good entree into what good SEC tailgating looks like. A wonderful environment at Faurot Field. It's going to be fabulous. I can't wait. I know we were joking about it, off camera, but you might have to wheel me into the stadium with all the eating I might do that weekend.
Barry, 30 seconds. You've been there before. I remember when you wrote a story back when OSU played them in the Cotton Bowl. What's it like on the campus at Ole Miss?
Very William Faulknerish, sleepy southern town, dripping with history and intrigue and all kinds of deep secrets. So Mississippi football is steeped in tradition, not necessarily success, but tradition. It should be a wild place to go. The Grove, the Archie Manning, 18-mile-an-hour speed limits throughout campus in honor of his old number. Ole Miss is a place that treasures its tradition.
Jenni, 30 seconds to you. Have you been to any of these places the Sooners are going to on the road next year? And which one are you looking forward to?
I have not, at least not for football games. I've been there for some other things over the years. LSU comes to mind. I have been to Baton Rouge. Not looking forward to the traffic because I was there on a non-game day and it stunk. So I'm going to need some information about how to traverse that if I'm headed to LSU. But I am looking forward to LSU potentially. Although, you know, all of them are really, for reasons that are all individual. They would all be good, fun spots to go to. And frankly, something like hearing Rocky Top in Norman, to me, gets my juices flowing. So all these games, something different. These are the type of games, matchups that we only expected on the non-conference for Oklahoma in the past. So the fact that these are now regular, steady diet of these types of matchups, I'm sure at some point it'll get old, but not yet.
Guerin, we'll give you the last word on this. 30 seconds. Looking forward, give me a team who's not on Oklahoma's road schedule this year that you're most looking forward to in the future.
Georgia, want to see the Hedges for myself. Want to hear I'm not wild about Starkville necessarily, but I've heard so much about the sheer volume of the cowbells that I'd like to.
Hey guys, Barry's gonna love Starkville. I can already tell you that.
Already been there.
Wouldn't mind the Swamp. Been to Knoxville, loved it. Been to Tuscaloosa, loved it. Looking forward to that if I get the opportunity. I'll volunteer, by the way, if it means going to the Grove or going to Death Valley and hanging out with the tailgaters at night in LSU. I'll happily volunteer to sit out Mizzou. I'll take that bullet.
Taking a bullet, Guerin, man.
Hey, Eli, you're outnumbered on this one, brother. Sorry, I can't help you out.
Tough. But Guerin, speaking of getting wheeled into the stadium, we could do some damage at the Grove and in Baton Rouge.
Is there a reason to think that the two Kansas grads need to go with the Missouri grad to Columbia?
I believe so. It sounds like a great idea to me.
Barry and I will be hanging out in, Boulder or something like that same weekend, maybe. All right, guys, I appreciate it. It's been fun. It's going to be fun next year. Don't forget, we've got you covered. There's a ton of portal news going on, guys, in and out of the portal. The Sooners getting all kinds of portal gets, so be sure and follow Eli Lederman's portal tracker and keep up with everything over at selloutcrowd.com. Big thanks to Jacqueline Musgrove. Big thanks to Michael Lane, Michael Martin, and Bobby Howard for all that they do behind the scenes. Thanks to you the most for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to all of us on the Sellout Crowd Network, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube. Thank you for watching here at Sellout Crowd.